To horror fans, it is affectionately known as the Year of the Wolf. From March to October of 1981, moviegoers were offered a rare treat: the release of not one, not two, not three, but 4 werewolf movies to cinemas. Now, sure, the Adam Arkin-starring werewolf comedy, Full Moon High, is rarely cited as one of the better efforts of writer-director Larry Cohen. And yes, there are still debates about whether the New York City detective mystery / Native American supernatural thriller Wolfman, starring Albert Finney, can really be considered a true werewolf movie, given that its titular creatures never take human form, despite exhibiting the mental faculties of humans. But there's no denying the seismic impact of 1981's other 2 werewolf films, Joe Dante's The Howling and John Landis's An American Werewolf in London, both still today easily considered 2 of the best films in the entire werewolf subgenre. Not that they necessarily have a lot of competition. Perhaps another reason 1981's influx of werewolf movies felt so significant was that, for fans of the hairy beasts, it was scratching an itch not often given a lot of attention. Perhaps due to the technical difficulties of convincingly depicting a truly terrifying werewolf, many horror fans often bemoan the fairly low number of werewolf movies, at least when compared to the seemingly endless array of vampire, zombie, and slasher films that otherwise dominate the horror genre. In fact, the wave of werewolf films in '81 was really the creature's first big bite of the mainstream box office in 20 years, since Hammer Films' 1961 Curse of the Werewolf, starring Oliver Reed, an actor arguably born to play a werewolf. Perhaps this 20-year cycle was appropriate, given that Curse of the Werewolf itself was released 20 years after the movie that really cemented the werewolf in pop culture, Universal's 1941 classic, The Wolfman. Lon Chaney Jr. starred as the doomed Larry Talbot, who returns to his ancestral home only to shortly thereafter be bitten and transformed by a half-man, half-wolf monster. The Wolfman wasn't the first werewolf movie. Heck, it wasn't even the first from Universal, as they had also released Werewolf of London in 1935. But German writer Kurt Siodmak's screenplay for The Wolfman would actually introduce a number of now standard elements of the werewolf mythos that are often today mistaken for coming from ancient folklore. The lunar cycle-based transformations, the transference of the curse through a bite or scratch, the aversion to silver, and of course, the famous poem now so associated with the creature. Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfsbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. The Wolfman would go on to become one of Universal's most beloved iconic monsters, with Lon Chaney Jr. reprising the role in 4 sequels. And, barring the Bride of Frankenstein's 1 film appearance, the only classic Universal monster to be portrayed solely by one specific actor in each of his movies. The Wolfman in 41, Curse of the Werewolf in 61, The Howling and American Werewolf in London in 81. Unfortunately, Universal would miss out on the chance to keep the 20-year cycle of important mainstream werewolf cinema alive in 2001, as that year, they were instead more focused on the sequel to the remake of another one of their classic monsters, with The Mummy Returns. Still, the success of the new Mummy films did convince the studio it was time to resurrect the rest of their Universal monster lineup, including the Wolfman, as they would first include werewolves as a significant element of 2004's Van Helsing, and then, finally, 6 years later, they would unleash a remake of the one that started it all, with a new mega-budget take on the classic 1941 film. And now, appropriately enough, 20 years since 1981's Year of the Wolf, we are here to discuss this ill-fated remake. A movie that would ultimately appear to perhaps be as cursed as its titular monster. The year is 2010, and Universal Pictures are ready to launch a brand new franchise based on one of their most iconic horror creations, with The Wolfman.
10, Welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris. And in this episode, Benicio broods while Blunt moods, Hopkins bluffs while Weaving gruffs, and as the Wolfman howls, well, F2F scowls.
Ah, nice. Your own little version of the famous Wolfman poem. I'm glad we're finally addressing this film. This film today that addresses an age-old question that I know you and I have wondered about, Chris. I know just the world has wondered about. Is it possible for any man to be around Emily Blunt and not turn into a wolf? I don't know. Also today, before we get into it, I know we have, we'll hit on it in a second, but I was kind of thinking about this, Chris. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is a Fear the Franchise first. I think this is our first Academy Award-winning film that we've looked at.
I believe you're right. Yes?
Nope. Sorry, I just checked my notes. I forgot. We both forgot Catwoman won Best Picture. Sorry.
Right.
That. Yeah. It was. I remember how shocked the Academy, like everybody was, just
Best acceptance speech I've ever heard.
The Academy just went hog wild that year.
Yeah. Petoff could not be stopped.
No, but oddly enough, in or episode 2 of our Curse of the Dark Universe September, October, Halloween event, we'll call it, we are today looking at the 2010's The Wolfman. Not The Wolf Spaceman, as the original one was written, but just
The Wolf Spaceman? Like he went to the moon?
That sounds great. Okay, hold on. 1 second, Chris. Wolf Spaceman. Call Bob Iger. Okay, just had to make a note. Anyways, saying the original version was obviously 3 words, The Wolfman. For whatever reason, the remake is just The Wolfman. I guess they figured, save some space on that poster. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the 2010 remake of the 1941 classic?
Well, do you think, the new remake that is going to inevitably happen will just drop the like all the other remakes do nowadays?
And just be Wolfman?
Just Wolfman.
That's probably a safe bet. Or it'll just be and they'll forget the Wolfman part.
The man.
Ryan Gosling is the.
All right, well, this one is directed by Joe Johnston, most famous at the time for The Rocketeer, Jumanji, and Jurassic Park 3. This is written by Andrew Kevin Walker. He wrote 7, 8mm, Sleepy Hollow. And then there was a rewrite done, which we'll get into, by David Self, who wrote The Haunting and Road to Perdition. Yep. This is, of course, as Trev said, a remake of the 1941 version, written by Kurt Siodmak. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, Siodmak. Yeah.
Siodmak.
Directed by George Wagner, yeah.
This has a budget of $150 million. Actually, originally it had a budget of $85 million, and it ballooned out of control into a $150 million. Domestically, it took home $62 million, and worldwide, $140 million. So this was at the time, one of the biggest bombs that Universal has ever had.
Right. It's since been kind of surpassed, and even I think a little bit forgotten in discussions of big bombs, but it can't be overstated how gigantic of a bomb this was at the time.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes sense because as we're about to talk about, we haven't had one of these in a while, Chris. We've obviously looked at some bad films. We've looked at some films where it was kind of clear why they didn't take off, why they didn't get the sequels or follow-ups. But we haven't talked about a goddamn mess of a movie in a while, in terms of behind-the-scenes shenanigans. And that is, I think when this film came out, the majority of the discussion about it was, oh man, what a rocky road to get from initial conception to the big screen. So I think we have a lot to talk about here before we even get into the film. So we'll try and, quickly kind of summarize it, but I think there's a lot worth saying because it ultimately feeds into why the film might be the film it is. So, we talked about this last time, so we don't need to kind of reiterate it. The entire purpose of the Curse of the Dark Universe event that we're doing is this acknowledgement that Universal has kind of consistently tried to reboot a lot of these classic Universal monster properties. And, always maybe with a little bit of an eye to either follow-ups and sequels or even in some cases just a bigger kind of shared universe. I don't think that's necessarily what they were thinking with this one, but they were definitely, as we can see from this film, and we'll talk about it, they were definitely looking at this as a potential franchise starter for sure. This, of course, is following in the wake of, the kind of similar failure of Van Helsing, which, was from 2004. We looked at it last time. That didn't take off. You and I both agreed that's because it's a gigantic piece of shit. Don't need to reiterate. We don't have to go back over that again. We both hate it. You said it was terrible. I agree.
Don't you dare revisionist history me.
But no, so Van Helsing doesn't take off. So then, the Universal monsters sit dormant again for a little bit. And then they decide, well, let's try again. Instead of going in that, go all in, create a new property where we combine them all. Let's just do what we did with The Mummy, right? What worked with The Mummy in 1999 was just kind of a more straight remake of one of the classic Universal monster films. And honestly, The Wolfman is probably a good choice for that. I think The Wolfman is a good choice for the same reason The Mummy was, that it doesn't carry all the same baggage as Dracula and Frankenstein, which by this point had just been, no pun intended, done to death, both of them. You know, there's so many Dracula movies, so many Frankenstein movies. Wolfman, not as much. Not too many. You know, the werewolf is a popular monster, but there's not really a lot of werewolf films, and definitely even, you know, there's a kind of a dearth of quality werewolf films. So I think they looked at this as like a kind of a good one to say, like, oh, okay, that's one of the universal monsters everyone knows, everyone loves, but people aren't sick of this in the same way that they are maybe with Dracula and Frankenstein. And they also get another big boon when they discover that an actor who at this time is kind of hot, right? Kind of maybe the hottest he's been or will be, Benicio Del Toro. It's discovered that Benicio Del Toro is actually a huge fan of the original 41 Wolfman and of Lon Chaney Jr.'s characterization of Lawrence Talbot, or Larry Talbot. He collects merch for the original. He's just a big Wolfman nut. So he signs on, I believe, isn't it 2006 when he first gets involved with this?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. And he signs on in 2006, not only to star in it, but also to produce it. And for everything we're about to talk about throughout this entire process, as up and down as it is, he stays involved both as a leading man and a producer. And I think that's kind of telling. You know, I'm surprised. I think other actors would have dropped out during a lot of this drama. But this was actually a passion project for Benicio Del Toro.
Yeah, he was a huge fan of everything. He actually even looked to take notes from the classics Werewolf of London and The Curse of the Werewolf. I guess inspiration is the word I was looking for. Yeah. But yeah, he was all in, creatively, in front of the camera and behind the scenes. So yeah, it's the... What the fuck am I trying to say here? I think I'm vamping.
You're trying to say Benicio Del Toro likes Wolfman. Right?
Yes, he likes Wolfman.
Benicio Del Toro likes Wolfman. All right, let's wrap it up. Like I said, he's all in. He really is pushing for it. So he's announced, his involvement is announced, and the project in general is announced in 2006. Not too long after that, Andrew Kevin Walker signs on to write the script, which you had mentioned, and that kind of made sense at the time too. You look at, they obviously were, with this one, we're aiming for a little bit more of a darker horror film. So get the guy who wrote Seven. Get the guy who wrote Sleepy Hollow. I think Sleepy Hollow in particular would be the film they're probably looking at and saying, give us some more of that, please. Because that's such kind of like this perfect little gothic. I mean, I love Sleepy Hollow. This little like gothic, dark, violent, but still fun horror film.
Lots of fog.
Lots of fog. Lots of, a lot of moodiness. But not without feeling too dour or anything. Still a fun film. So he signs on. And then February 2007, we get our director. You heard Chris say Joe Johnston already? Hold on a second. We'll get to him. But first, we actually get Mark Romanek signs on. If that name doesn't mean a lot to you, not the most surprising in the world. Mark Romanek has not directed too many films. In fact, at the time they signed him to this, he's only directed 2 movies. So far, at this point, he's directed a 1985 comedy called Static. But what he's really coming off of, if there's like hype around him in Hollywood, it's that in 2002, he directs 1 Hour Photo, which is this kind of like really intense thriller starring Robin Williams in one of his really memorable villainous terms. Have you seen 1 Hour Photo, Chris?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I enjoy
Very
that
chilling
movie quite
film.
a bit.
Yes.
I don't want to say I enjoy the movie. It's not one to be enjoyed.
No.
But it is like you said, chilling is the perfect word for that film. Definitely.
Yeah, I always loved whenever Robin Williams did those kind of roles where he pushed himself into that kind of scary territory.
Absolutely.
Like this or Insomnia. And, Death to Smoochie. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a little bit different, I suppose, but underrated film. So Mark Romanek signs on to this. What Mark Romanek is really most known for is he's one of those like very, very successful, very famous music video directors. This was like a huge trend in Hollywood in the late 90s, early 2000s. I'm sure you remember this too, Chris, of let's just snatch up all these great music video directors. So we have, David Fincher coming from the world of music videos. We have Spike Jonze, Michel Gondry. I don't know if Chris Cunningham ever ended up doing a film, but all these people who are directing these kind of like groundbreaking avant-garde music videos, Hollywood just says, well, they clearly know visuals. They understand visual storytelling, so let's bring them in. Some of the music videos that Mark Romanek has done, which people might know, is he did the classic Hurt video for Johnny Cash, Closer for Nine Inch Nails, Can't Stop for Red Hot Chili Peppers, Criminal for Fiona Apple, and the Scream video for Michael and Janet Jackson, which is a pretty cool like sci-fi based video. Oh, and he also directed Shake It Off, I just see, from Taylor Swift. So yeah, he's still today like a very successful music video director. So he's brought on to work on this.
Yeah, and he had a original vision for the film to infuse a balance of cinema in a popcorn movie scenario. He's quoted to saying, "When there's a certain amount of money involved, these things make studios and producers a little nervous. They don't necessarily understand it, or they feel that the balance will swing too far for something esoteric." Sorry. I can't speak today. Sorry. Bear with me.
We got plenty of time.
Okay, cool. Okay. Flash forward 3 days. Esoteric.
We're entering the second week of this Mark Romanek quote. It's like Hearts of Darkness. Just like, oh.
There's vines on my fucking walls inside here. All right. They don't necessarily understand it, or they feel that the balance will swing too far to something esoteric, and we could never come to an agreement on the right balance for that type of thing. Ultimately, it made more sense for them to find a director that was going to fulfill their idea of the film that they wanted, and we just sort of parted ways.
Yeah, so as we hear in that quote, we get the old Hollywood standby creative differences. So in January 2008, Mark Romanek drops out of the project. But the thing is, he, as you said, he had this vision. Pre-production was well underway. He actually drops out at a point where they're only weeks away from filming. Like a lot of the development work has been done. So this is not something where they're just going to stop and be like, okay, well, we'll come back around to this. This train has already left the station. So suddenly we have this like kind of mad dash to find a new director. And the names that get thrown about are some of those standard names you will often hear come into discussions like this, of course, meaning Brett Ratner, right? Brett Ratner
Every
emerges as an
time,
early front runner.
Every
time, right? So because, he's the kind of guy who you can just, hey, Brett, it starts filming tomorrow. Are you ready? Oh, yeah, sure. Oh, do you need any time to come up with your own vision? Nope. That's the Brett Ratner way.
Throws his shrimp cocktail across the room. Just
yeah. Oh God. Less said about that story, the better. Go Google it, folks. He's the front runner, and then other names that are kind of thrown about are Frank Darabont, James Mangold, Bill Condon, and then Martin Campbell actually kind of puts his own name out there. Martin Campbell, director of Goldeneye and Casino Royale, he kind of steps forward and says, like, I would like to direct it. And then, of course, Joe Johnston ends up getting the job. Now, what I thought was interesting about this, Chris, were the names that I didn't see kind of brought up. And I don't know if you thought about this, but I'm looking at the list of names they were considering. Now, Frank Darabont certainly has some horror cred behind him. He kind of makes sense to me. Bill Condon had recently done Gods and Monsters about James Whale, the director of Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. So I can maybe see that a little bit. He'd also directed the Candyman sequel, Candyman Farewell to the Flesh. But I'm looking at this and I'm wondering, whose names aren't on here? I don't see Wes Craven. I don't see John Landis. That's very surprising to me, right? That these aren't the names they would have gone to. Like John Landis, who directed American Werewolf in London, talks about the Wolfman in basically every horror documentary you can find. Just surprised me that they didn't look at horror directors. And I think that tells you a lot about where Universal is kind of still leading with this. Mm-hmm. And probably can give us a little peek into maybe what happened with Mark Romanek in terms of his kind of darker sensibility, right? I think they're like, we don't necessarily want horror guys. We want blockbuster guys again. Is that kind of how you feel looking at this?
That and company men.
Yes.
They want work for hire guys, and Wes Craven and John Landis aren't going to be work for hire. They're going to have a very specific vision, and they're going to want to make the movie that they want to make. That's my view on it. Is that they just wanted somebody to push around. Well,
to be fair, I kind of understand. Again, we were only so when Joe Johnston signs on, I believe the information I have says they were 3 weeks away from filming.
Yes.
So you do need someone who kind of just has a steady hand and maybe can come in and easily pick up where Romanek left off. Now, the issue here is, though, that Joe Johnston comes on. I believe we have some quotes about this as well, him talking about, jumping into this project. But even though he kind of understands the situation, he still, of course, understandably wants to put his own stamp on it as well. So that means that with only 3 weeks to go before filming, he also brings in David Self to rewrite the script, which means that's a very, very hurried rewrite. Okay, so that's one issue. And then we have some other information as well.
He goes on to say, one of the issues with the previous director was that he had said he needed another 20 days, and that became one of the areas of disagreement that led to the studio looking for a new director. I told them I could do it, But after I was hired, we soon added about 17 pages back to the script, so that schedule no longer applied. The studio had invested a lot of money. They had gone down a certain road with the production design and concept, and I have to say, in Mark Romanek's defense, he made a lot of the correct choices. He had set the ship off in a good direction, but I wanted to put my stamp on the film. I did that with casting and with the locations. We did a rewrite too, but it was not a situation where I wanted to throw everything out, and I wouldn't have been able to do that anyway. I took over the wheel, took it in a slightly different direction.
So, I mean, to a certain degree, it's actually kind of impressive, right? I think about that in my head, like, we can talk, however, whether we think it worked out or not, but there is something to be said for someone coming into a production of this size with only 3 weeks to go and being able to kind of jump into that and steer that ship a little bit, you know? I will say, like, I understand I'm maybe a little, I can say I'm frustrated that they didn't think of other directors, but sometimes you do need that person who's just like, he gets it, right? He can come in and do that. And yes, I agree with him that you do want to put your own stamp on it. He doesn't just want to come in and direct the movie Romanek was going to make. Of course, he wants to put his own touches on it. So that creates this kind of interesting, already problem here. And I have some theories about what we see in the film to where we can actually see those two visions clashing. But he comes in with 3 weeks to go, quick rewrite, then hits the ground running, filming this movie. The problem is, this is already, like, people are hearing this behind the scenes scuttlebutt. So there's already some discussion in the ether, in the press, about this being a troubled production. And boy, it's not going to get any better once the film is made. Right, Chris?
Oh, absolutely. Do you want to know how many release dates this movie had?
Oh, I know, but why don't we tell the listeners? Because I've got them in front of me.
So originally, November 12th, 2008.
Yep.
Then pushed to February 12th, 2009. Then moved to April 3rd, 2009. Then delayed again to November 6th, 2009. And then finally, it was released in the Valentine's Day frame of February 12th, 2010.
Yes.
So, like we said before, this movie had started, the wheels were turning in 2006, and this movie did not see release till the beginning of 2010. This was such a cluster across the board.
Yes.
There was even didn't they hired a new editor too, right? Like they recut the film from scratch, I think, as well.
Well, they brought in, so there's still more to talk about here because they end up bringing in two kind of well-known editors at the end to kind of try and save this. But let's first talk about why there are so many delays initially, right? So obviously there's some delays because you bring on a new director, so that kind of slows things down. But this is why it actually becomes kind of funny in retrospect, in a sad way, right? That they got rid of Romanek because he wanted just 20 more days, right? They're like, we can't give you those 20 more days. Well, geez, because ultimately the shooting under Joe Johnston happens from March to June of 2008, and that's the initial $85 million budget. The problem is when they look at the initial cut that comes out of that, they actually realize that a bunch of the stuff they decided not to film and kind of jettisoned from the original Romanek script for budget concerns or whatever, they say ooh, actually, you know what? The movie needed that stuff. That stuff is actually very, very important. So the cast and crew is actually reassembled and they come back for weekends in May of 2009 for very, very costly reshoots. And there's a lot of you'll hear differing things about what these reshoots entail. Joe Johnston has talked about how it was kind of to come in and beef up the ending and put back in some crucial action scenes that were left out. There's also some discussion in various articles about how they looked at the film and didn't like how the werewolf, or the Wolfman, was always standing on two legs. And so they kind of feel ooh, actually, we want to go back and make him more animalistic and film some new kind of action sequences where he runs on the four legs. So that's obviously more CGI and stunt-based budget. So these reshoots not only delay the film, but this is why we see a budget go from 85 to 150. That's a pretty big leap, and that just tells you how extensive these reshoots were.
They also spent money on 2 scores.
Yeah.
So this is usually we save score horror moments for later in the review, but this one actually had some pre-production, post-production, principal production, everything in between. So originally they hired Danny Elfman. So Trev mentioned before about the Sleepy Hollow vibe. Well, Danny Elfman is a Tim Burton staple, so of course they hired this guy to bring in his dark, melodic, and moody score sensibilities. Mm-hmm. Well, he did too much work, and they were not they were not happy with it, and it was way too wall to wall. Johnston called it just repetitive as hell, and threw it out. So
and the issue with that really was that, as you said, he created a score that covered the entirety of what they filmed, and then they started cutting the film down. And once they edited the film down, cut out about half an hour, but still tried to insert his score into it. As you just said, that made the score not fit in anymore, and now it's just, as you just said, like just wall-to-wall music that the same themes were repeating over sequences where they didn't belong.
So then the studio hires Paul Haslinger. They wanted to quicken the pace and strike kind of like a similar tone to the Underworld films at this point. So they wanted kind of a electronic, contemporary score, which they soon found out that they hated. So they, I guess, fired Paul or let him go or whatever Hollywood likes to do. But they thought it was not appropriate for the 19th century Gothic setting, even though that's what they hired him to do.
Right.
But anyway, as Hollywood does, they Hollywood gonna Hollywood.
Yeah, this is a Hollywood movie in all the best, by which I mean wrong ways.
Well, and the weirdest part, Trev, is that at the end of the day, 1 month before this film is supposed to hit theaters in February 2010, they decide to reinsert Danny Elfman's score into it.
Yep. Yeah, so they just take that original score, and they actually still have to do some tinkering with it. They actually bring in some uncredited composers, including Conrad Pope, Edward Schirmer, and Thomas Lindgren, and they give them the original full recording of his score and just say, okay, can you kind of reshape this so that it actually fits into the cut of the film we have now, right? And so what we actually get in the movie is a Danny Elfman score. He's credited as it being his score, but it's kind of this like mishmash of his original score. In fact, the version of Danny Elfman's Wolfman score that's eventually released on CD in February of that year is quite different than the music you hear in the movie, because it's actually all his original cues. So I think that's interesting. So they paid for 2 versions of the score. They paid for the Elfman one and the Haslinger one. We've never heard the Haslinger one, and we've heard actually kind of 2 different versions of the Elfman one, even the one in the movie and then the one you can listen to as an album. So yeah, just again a huge mess here. And then, yeah, Chris, as you mentioned too, like as we're getting closer to like release, or as they're doing their initial cuts, they scrap the original editor and they bring in Mark Goldblatt and Walter Murch, both of whom are kind of really seasoned hands in editing in Hollywood. And they give them all this stuff and say, you guys figure this out. Here's this original cut. Here's these reshoots. Here's this score that's all butchered now. I don't know. You put it together and make something of it. This movie even existing is something of a miracle before we even start talking about quality, right? The fact that that it comes out in any kind of form after all this is kind of amazing to a certain degree. But
I have to say we haven't pointed this out yet, but Joe Johnston, for what we're going to say about the film in a bit here, this guy is a Spielberg protege.
Right.
Almost
Lucas
directly.
protege, mostly, yeah.
Yeah.
He actually got to start working on the special effects in the original Star Wars and A New Hope.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. So, like we said before, that he took over from Spielberg for the Jurassic Park series. So he was Jurassic Park 3's director. So this guy is a capable guy. He's been around the best in the business his entire career. He's made some good stuff prior to this film. So he does sound like the guy to hold all these pieces together, despite the puzzle completely breaking apart at all times.
I was thinking about that. I was thinking he's such an old, sure hand that I was thinking about like working on this movie. And I bet when all this was going on, obviously everyone involved had to know what a nightmare this production was. I'm sure they felt it. But I bet there was a little bit of a level of comfort coming to set knowing that he's the guiding hand. Because I bet you he took a lot of this in stride and was just able to say, okay, don't worry, just buckle down. I've got this. I'm sure he felt stressed, but I would feel more confident with him at the helm at this point than a Brett Ratner, for sure. Just somewhere you feel like, yes, okay, he's been to the trenches. As you said, he's done Jurassic Park 3. He's done The Rocketeer. He's worked with Lucas. He's worked with Spielberg. This is a guy who knows what he's doing. So that is kind of the one positive they have going for them at this point. And, of course, the other person who's still pumping this through and making sure it gets out is Benicio Del Toro. He's not going to give up on this project. As I said, I think many other actors would have just been like, I'm out of here. Forget this. Mm-hmm. And he's really intent on getting this out there and having this be kind of a signature star vehicle for himself.
Should we get into it?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Lo and behold, Prodigal son returns.
Hello, Father.
You've come for the funeral.
What happened?
Your brother's body was found in a ditch. He'd been torn to pieces.
If there's anything you need, please let me know.
I want to know what happened to him.
Francis Aberline, Scotland Yard.
I cannot stress enough the mortal peril you're in.
What kind of animal could have done such a thing?
You're risking your life. Darkness comes for you.
He's been quite seriously injured.
Thank you for staying with me.
Now we know it's still out there.
You were bitten by the beast. You bear his mark now.
Do you believe in curses? You have to leave.
What are you afraid of?
There are those who doubt the power, who change men into beasts. A beast has come among us.
Terrible things, Lawrence. You've done terrible things. Be strong, son. Be strong.
I am what they say I am. I'm a monster.
I will kill all of you!
Let me help you.
Beast will have its day.
Nobleman Lawrence Talbot returns to his ancestral home in Victorian England to news of the brutal murder of his brother Ben. Someone or something with brute strength and an insatiable bloodlust has been killing villagers, and a suspicious Scotland Yard inspector has come to investigate. Reunited with his estranged father, Sir John Talbot, Lawrence sets out to find his brother's killer and discovers a horrifying destiny for himself. While Lawrence was out searching, he's attacked by the beast and is now cursed to become half man, half wolf on every full moon night. Now in hiding, Lawrence's brother's grieving fiancée Gwen seeks to find a way to have him saved before it's too late.
The Wolfman, 2010. Chris, I have only seen this film once, back on opening weekend in the theater, and have not revisited it until for our viewing for this show. But I'm kind of curious. I want to hear first from you, because you and I have really never talked about this movie. And in fact, I actually, which we'll talk about in a moment, I actually convinced you to watch the original for the first time for the purposes of this podcast. We can talk about that as well in terms of contrasting the two. But why don't you tell me, what are your general feelings about The Wolfman 2010? We just talked about what a troubled production it was. How did that translate to the film itself for you?
Well, I actually saw this movie the same time as you did, on opening weekend in 2010. I actually genuinely remember me and my friend Tim going to see it. And at the time, my only experience with the Wolfman ever was in the movie Beethoven. Do you remember that movie about the dog?
I do, yeah.
Okay,
I don't remember anything about the Wolfman being in it, but it's been a very long time for me. So.
Well, there's a scene in Beethoven where Beethoven the dog is watching TV.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and he's flipping through the channels, and then he watches a bit of the Wolfman.
Okay.
And I like that movie Beethoven. Anyways, that was my only experience with the Wolfman.
Do you think someday there'll be a Beethoven reboot, and in the reboot he'll be watching the 2010 Wolfman?
Write that shit down right now.
Okay, hold on.
Okay.
Call Bob Iger again.
Okay, good.
Beethoven reboot. Okay.
So back then, I wasn't a huge fan of it, but it's 11 years later, and I honestly couldn't remember anything. I actually completely forgot that Emily Blunt is in this film. Completely forgot. When I was doing some research before watching the movie, that's when I realized it. I was like, holy shit, Emily Blunt was in this?
Well, I'd say probably for both of us too, this is before we really started to track her, kind of, right? And I don't mean track her like stalkers, so let's calm down here,
Allegedly.
I mean more that I just wasn't necessarily a fan of Emily Blunt yet, so I didn't necessarily have a memory of her being the female lead in this.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So my thoughts on the film. This movie lacks a complete self-awareness. It is way too serious and also way too hokey. It's at conflict with itself throughout. Is it a gore-filled slasher, Trev? Is it a murder mystery? Is it a blockbuster CGI fest? Or is it a morose gothic romance? Nobody knows. because it's completely directionless and it's misguided and it just sort of exists. That's really my feelings on the movie. It is just a movie that I watched.
Yeah, I don't feel too differently. I'm probably less harsh than you are, which is kind of surprising to me because, as I just said, so I saw this once in the theater on opening weekend and really didn't like it. So so that's why I never revisited it. I remember being very frustrated with it, and I won't say that frustration isn't still there, but I will say I don't know if it's a byproduct of coming back to it 11 years later, or if it's perhaps that this time, unlike you, this time I actually watched the extended director's cut, and I know you still watch the theatrical cut, right?
Yeah.
So I watched the director's cut. Now, as you said, I don't really remember the theatrical enough to know like how significant a lot of those differences were. I know certainly one of the differences, which we'll talk about because it's the most reported one. But maybe there's something there because I watched this and I thought, okay, you're right that I can't go as far as calling this a good movie because this is definitely a movie where you see all the behind-the-scenes struggles we just talked about.
Yeah.
So this is a movie that's at war with itself. That said, I will say there was more in this movie that I liked than I remembered or that I expected. So I'm going to be slightly positive at times because I actually think there are things to enjoy here. And I didn't walk away completely disgusted from this. I mean, to me, I know you're going to disagree. I think this is like much more successful and a much better film than Van Helsing. I think there's like more that's working here. There's just unfortunately, and you just alluded to it, there's some really crucial problems it can't overcome. And I definitely want to talk about those because this to me is that special kind of frustrating where, man, I keep seeing how they're just so close to making an actual really good movie, and then they keep hitting these bumps, right, and not getting over them, and that bums me out. But that said, I kind of enjoyed this a little bit to a certain level. So I don't know. I don't really know how to ultimately rank this. I'm very much in the middle here. You know what I mean? Like,
no, honestly, and I'm kind of there with you. Like, I know what I said sounds really harsh, but we're gonna get into the details. I have some positive things as well. Yeah. I think when this movie chooses a lane, it succeeds.
You're right. Because you just mentioned how it's all these different things, right? Any one of those individually looks like it would have worked.
Yeah.
Right? Because when it goes into like hyper gory slasher film, I'm having a ball.
I loved it.
Right? Yeah. And like, so the Wolfman rampages in this are fantastic. And I remember those were the things I liked in the theater, and I still loved them this time. I'm like, oh, this is some of the best like werewolf stuff I've ever seen. He's lopping people's heads off, poking his fingers through the bottoms of people's chins and coming out their mouth, right? Pulling intestines out. In a Universal Studio film, they could have easily went PG-13. I'll give them credit. They said like, no, let's go R and let's go hard R. I mean, this is a very, very gory film. And I love that stuff. There are some performances I think are okay, some not. I think visually it has a nice like kind of moody look to it. So I think like when it's trying to like be like a moody gothic piece, sometimes that works. But you're right that it never seems to make the decision of which one to lean into.
Yeah, like I'm glad you mentioned about the moody look of it because I actually liked how the colors are kind of washed out. It's almost like have your cake and eat it too. You know, it's black and white. Film was the original. This one's not going to be black and white, but it's like sort of black and white. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it makes the blood really pop. And it doesn't seem like there's a lot. I mean, there's probably CGI blood for sure, or at least in the color correction, they've like made the reds really, really jump. But I thought the gore, especially like you said, it was gooey. It sounds like a gross word to say, but it was like kind of like the blood was thick and gushy. You know what I mean?
It was moist.
This is the part where everybody tunes out. But no, like I thought the violence was it's weird to say, but great. All the werewolf, like the way the werewolf looks, or sorry, the Wolfman when he looks like when he's full on Wolfman, looks awesome.
Yeah,
it's incredible. That's Rick Baker. We haven't even mentioned his name yet, but he's the VFX artist in charge of this movie, most famously from American Werewolf in London, where he wins the Academy Award for that film. And
not only does he win the Academy Award, Chris, they actually create the award that year so he can win it. The success of American Werewolf in London leads the Oscars to creating the Best Makeup Award, and that's when he wins the award.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah.
But he actually wins for this film too. So what we said before, this movie's an Oscar-winning film, and honestly,
it deserves that Oscar.
Absolutely. The design work is awesome. It's the perfect blend of like modern Wolfman and then classic Wolfman. Yeah. So I liked all that quite a bit. The gothic stuff, great. I love a gothic horror movie, haunted house movie. I love all that shit. The murder mystery is interesting, but again, it just doesn't know what it wants to do. Mm-hmm. And I found myself frustrated during, and you're gonna hate this, but this is what I meant when I say I like Van Helsing, is that movie is okay. Let's just say it's junk, but I feel that movie knows it's junk. And it's at least being a summer blockbuster. This movie just can't pick a lane.
Yeah, no, I won't. I mean, I'm not going to disagree that Van Helsing is a more confident film in terms of tonal consistency. Like, Van Helsing is a movie that knows what it's doing from beginning to end. For me, the issue there is that I don't like what it's doing. Like, I don't like what it's aiming for. Here we have a confused film that has peaks and valleys, but I'm like really, really into those peaks. You know, like the peaks are like really speaking to me, and the valleys aren't ultimately that bad. You know, there's nothing to me that's like makes me angry in this film. There's nothing I think is like overly aggravating. It's more just like, oh, that's kind of disappointing, right? Or boy, that seems like it missed the mark. So yeah, it's like it's frustrating, but I was actually kind of surprised at how I was a little bit more into it this time than I expected to be, and certainly than I was the last time. But as we said, you know what? Actually, maybe let's talk about the original for a little bit first before we dive into like more specifics, just because I think it'll be helpful to be able to contrast the two. So for me, you know, I'm a huge Universal Monsters nut. I love the entire original Universal Monsters, you know, expansive universe, you know, the shared universe. A huge fan, in particular, my favorite is Bride of Frankenstein. But really, honestly, I can sit down and watch any of them with a smile on my face. I think there's something just nice about how they're all just like so short, simplistic, but that, as you said, that old kind of gothic feel. All these fantastic performances, now iconic performances. Of course, Bela Lugosi as Dracula, Boris Karloff as the monster. And then you have Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman. Actually, the only Universal monster to be played by only one actor through all their appearances. Unless you count Bride of Frankenstein, but that shouldn't count because she's only in one movie. But Dracula ends up being played by other actors besides Lugosi. Frankenstein's monster is played by other actors besides Karloff. But every time the Wolfman shows up, that's Lon Chaney Jr. That was his baby. And that really is, like, I think the original 41 Wolfman is one of the better Universal monster movies. It's just it's really classic, very successful, very effective tale of this like kind of doomed romance and a cursed individual. I think through Lon Chaney's performance, you really feel that curse. You really feel for the character. Yeah. He keeps that going even through consistently sillier and sillier sequels, but that first one is really, really where it's at. So, Chris, you visited it for the first time, and I know you're one of these, you know, millennial turds who doesn't like any movie made before 1995 or whatever. So I had to kind of convince you, hey, sit down and watch this. I was like, hey, it's only like an hour and 10 minutes. You can do it. You know, why don't you tell me, what did you think of the 41 Wolfman?
Yeah, admittedly, you're right. I don't watch a ton of classic Hollywood stuff. I definitely have to like kind of convince myself and put myself into the right frame of mind and commit. You know, I want to put my phone away. I really have to commit. So I was a little hesitant, but for the sake of the podcast and our friendship, which I hold very near and dear to my heart, I said, yes, I will give Trev 109 minutes. So I watched it, and yeah, it's great. It's great. I was fully engaged in the plot. I thought Lon Chaney Jr. was great, very charming, very charismatic. Some problematic wooing of the women.
I was going to say, it's actually very important that he's as charming as he is, because it helps you overlook what today does not necessarily fly in terms of some elements of that. Yeah.
And like, don't get me wrong, the love interest is very, very attractive. I have I really like. I know I don't really watch a lot of classic Hollywood, but that classic Hollywood leading lady. I love it. It's just the soft lighting, the hair, the dress. They're just always stunning to me.
Evelyn Ankers, she is gorgeous. Yeah.
So like I get it, but Lawrence Talbot probably shouldn't be spying on her from his room with a telescope.
No, probably not.
But alas, they form a love interest, and yeah, the curse angle I really liked a lot. That's something that we're gonna talk about with this film that I think doesn't work as well.
Yes.
But I definitely felt for Lawrence or Larry Talbot in this movie a lot more. And the cinematography in the 1941 Wolfman is incredible. The black and white really, really shines with the fog and in the forests. Huge fan of the cinematography, and it's just beautiful to look at. So I really recommend I know. Coming from 2021, everybody, go watch the 1941 The Wolfman.
And that initial Jack Pierce Wolfman design is just, it's iconic for a reason, right? It still looks great. Yep. Like, it's still, he just, like, you can say, like, by modern standards, his clothes just stay kind of perfect. They don't rip as we're expected. He doesn't look kind of as feral and as beast like. But there's just something about how simplistic it is and how you can still see Lon Chaney's eyes, and that's the important part, right? Because that really helps you. Even when he's kind of a monster, you still feel that person in there, that person that you're worried about. Such a fantastic monster movie. So this one did have a lot to live up to. So I guess let me start then by, unless you want to go in a different direction, but I think it's maybe worth starting with what I'll actually say is one of the surprising problems with this remake, and that is what I would have thought going into it was its biggest boon, and that is Benicio Del Toro, who I actually think is kind of bad in this movie. Not when he's the Wolfman. Like, when he's the Wolfman, it's great. And you can tell he must be having a ball, right? Because he's grown up always loving this character. He gets to put on all the makeup. He gets to run around, these super gory murders. And he's really good in those sequences. But as Lawrence Talbot, he's pretty boring, right? He's like a real sour sack in this movie. And this is where I have a theory, right? So I don't know if you thought about this too, Chris, but I have this feeling that what we're seeing is a performance that's more dictated by the original Mark Romanek vision for the film. I think Mark Romanek wanted to make this really kind of like, deeper, maybe more philosophical, sad horror film, right? So Andrew Kevin Walker writes it. As we say, Andrew Kevin Walker, known for Seven. I think they wrote like a more serious toned film, and Benicio Del Toro was like really clued into that. And then Joe Johnston came on, did his rewrite, tried to make it a little bit more of, add in some more adventure elements, tried to make it a little bit more blockbustery. And for whatever reason, I don't think Del Toro was willing to change his performance, or Joe Johnston didn't feel like he could tell Del Toro to change his performance because Del Toro was the producer, right? This was really his project. And so maybe Johnston was like, I'll just let him do what he wants. But you compare Lon Chaney Jr. in the first half of the 41 Wolfman to where he's actually like this really likable, charming guy. He's cracking jokes. He's smiling. And throughout this entire film, Benicio Del Toro is like, he's like sleepwalking.
Yeah.
It's really weird. And you think about like what a charismatic actor he usually is and how his best performances, when you think of him as Fenster in Usual Suspects.
What are you saying?
I say he'll flip you.
He'll what?
Flip you. Flip you for real.
Yeah, I'm shaking. Come on.
Okay.
Answer my question.
And you hit me in the back. Hello?
Or as DJ in The Last Jedi.
Oh, yeah. Don't let the rapper fool you, friend. Me and the First Order codage go way back. And if the price is right, I can break you into old man Snook's boudoir.
Benicio Del Toro's best characters are always kind of populated with these like weird tics and just bizarre speech patterns. And then this, he just seems like so out of it and bored the entire time. And that really hurts your ability to feel for him when he becomes this cursed figure, because it doesn't feel like we're losing this lively, likable guy. It just feels like we're watching a miserable guy become slightly more miserable. What did you think of his performance in this?
I'm right there with you. I think I mostly saw it with the romance angle. Him and Emily Blunt, it's just not working. And it's weird because they're both like extremely attractive, screen presences, presence-eye?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. But it just doesn't work. And I think I had a different take either, but I think you're right. Especially not being able to talk to the producer of the film to tell him to change his performance. But I think that maybe they were even going for something maybe dark, brooding, and sexy.
What's happened?
You have to leave. Please pack your things.
Did I do something?
It's not safe here. You must return to London tonight. I'll be out here waiting.
Lawrence, wait. What are you afraid of?
If anything ever happened to you, I'd never forgive myself.
and it's not clicking the way that they intended it to do. Something mysterious and sexy. You know what I mean? Because that's that's Benicio's look. You know, he is a scary guy to look at, but just he's got that rugged, scary, handsome. You know?
Yeah. Oh, he can smolder for sure.
Smolder.
Right?
That's a good word. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird because it's just surprising to me that the person involved with this production, who is maybe the biggest fan of the original, wouldn't be trying more to replicate that Lon Chaney performance. And maybe he felt self-conscious about that. Maybe it was maybe he was very conscious of that, saying, I'm going to do my own thing. But obviously, like, he kind of looks like Lon Chaney. You know, people talk about that. So you're kind of like expecting that from him. And yeah, I couldn't count how many times they cut to him, and you kind of just see him giving this like blank stare off into the distance. And even just kind of like his verbal mannerisms in this, I start to get sleepy like at some points, just because he's not a captivating enough leading man. And that's ultimately, to me, that's honestly the biggest problem with this film is his performance.
Very lifeless overall.
Mm-hmm. Well, should we also talk about what I will sometimes call the Hopkins problem?
Hopkins lymphoma?
Okay. Chris, let's talk about Anthony Hopkins.
Sure.
Because I think there's a definite discussion to be had about this guy. Let me preface by saying, of course I love Anthony Hopkins. Everybody loves Anthony Hopkins. A legendary actor. Every accolade he's ever gotten, well-deserved. That said, did his career move in a certain kind of trajectory in the wake of Silence of the Lambs and the massive success of Silence of the Lambs, and him being awarded so many accolades for what was like this kind of, theatrical performance? Yes. Do you see him start to like lean more into the hammy side of acting more often than not, especially when doing kind of big Hollywood movies? For sure. Does that sometimes work? Yes. Is it sometimes at odds with the movie? Yes. And here is where I think in The Wolfman, we have Anthony Hopkins giving one of those kind of very Anthony Hopkins-ish performances. He's kind of, again, we were just saying this is a movie at war with itself. The problem is he's playing Talbot's father. He's playing, John Talbot. And he is not matching Del Toro's energy. In fact, he's just like shitting all over it, right? He's so big and so like goofy that if Del Toro was trying to do the same thing, then we'd have something. Or if Hopkins was willing to kind of come down and also play this a little bit subdued, then we might have something. But boy, this is oil and water right here. What did you take? Because he's just too big. It's not really that amusing in this movie because it doesn't seem like it fits. I don't know. He was getting on my nerves, I would say, at some points.
Well, and I think that just comes down to what we're saying, that there's pieces that work. If Del Toro matched him, it would be working. So I think there's something to it that I did enjoy watching him, because like the campy B-movie territory comes in with the gore and the violence and the makeup effects, which I'm so down for. So then when Anthony Hopkins kind of matches that, I feel good about it. But then, like you said, the worst part of it is that he's sharing the scene with Del Toro.
Yeah, because I mean, I will be fair and say actually some of the best deliveries in the movie and some of the most memorable moments are Hopkins. So don't let me say he doesn't do anything good. I remember a moment that was in a trailer, and it actually is a great moment when Del Toro kind of wakes up after his first rampage as the Wolfman, and he's like kind of hidden in this crook of this tree, and he's covered in blood, and then his dad is standing over him. And Hopkins just looks at him and says, "You've done terrible things, Lawrence. Terrible things." Like, that's awesome. Like, that's a great delivery, right? And it's like, okay, there are moments where you see that, like, glint, that kind of manic glint in Hopkins' eye. And you're right, like, but you said, so if this movie was more in that direction, I was thinking of contrasting this to his performance in Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is another instance he plays Van Helsing in that, right? And he's very broad, very big and over the top, but he's matching the energy level of that movie. Because that movie is like so theatrical and so bombastic that it works. But there are times where this movie is trying to be really dour and really kind of depressing and miserable. And then Hopkins comes and he's like, "Hello, actor man coming through here." And you're like, whoa, this just isn't working. So yeah, you're right. It's just more, again, like the fact that the movie's a mess. It's not really, I guess I'm not really criticizing him. I'm saying the movie can't really figure out how to use him the right way.
I thought you were going to bring up Transformers: The Last Night.
Well, I love him in that. I mean, and that's what I mean, right? That's where he's just clearly having a ball.
Yes. You keep a secret for so long, knowing it to be true, and yet deep down inside, you begin to wonder, has my life been wasted? Have you ever felt like that, Mr. Kane?
It's just Cade. Look, old timer, I don't have a ton of patience for riddles right now.
Yes, but you want to know, don't you, dude?
Right. So I think there's something to be said for that style of acting, and I think it's great that later in his life he's just letting himself cut loose. I think there's some times where it works for the film, and then sometimes it doesn't. And I think we see, I guess we see both here at different times, and that's the weird part.
I think Hopkins decides every single movie the tone and what he's going to do, and he's basically directionless.
Yeah, well, that's another one, right? So if Joe Johnston couldn't talk to Del Toro because he's the producer, he can't direct Anthony Hopkins because it's Anthony Hopkins. Hopkins isn't listening to Joe Johnston. He's not listening to any director.
No.
Right?
No.
And, honestly, if I was a director, what are you going to say to Anthony Hopkins? I'm going to say, do whatever you want.
Hey, Tony.
Yeah.
Hey, Tony, can we bring it down a notch, please?
Yeah. No, that's not happening. Yeah. No. Emily Blunt, serviceable in this. I have nothing against her. I think she's doing as much as she can with a fairly lifeless role. So again, she's essentially playing a version of the Evelyn Anchor's part. It's a little bit more developed in this to a certain degree. But I don't know. I liked her in this. I thought she was fine. Emily Blunt's one of those actors who really feels like she fits into this kind of time period, this kind of this gothic world. So she just slots in very easily, right?
And she's just naturally charming. And like we said before, this isn't. This is kind of pre the Bluntissance. You know what I mean? Like we don't really know who Emily Blunt is at this point in time, but she's carried through that charm, that natural charm, her entire career going forward. And I just, every time I see Emily Blunt, I'm just automatically enthralled with her. Yeah. So in this movie, yeah, she's serviceable, but it's still Emily Blunt. So it's I like seeing her. So it's good. It's good.
I mean, you already mentioned, and I think you're right, that we want her and Del Toro to have more chemistry, and it's kind of surprising they don't. And if they did, that would also solve some of the issues with this, in particular as you get it later into the film. But ultimately, I mean, as you just said, I agree. When I see Emily Blunt, I'm just oh, I'm glad she's here, and she's doing what she can.
And I think in 2010, nobody knew how to use Emily Blunt in film at this point, right? So we didn't get Edge of Tomorrow, aka Live, Die, Repeat. We didn't get her in the press and how she is in the media. She's such a lively performer, but also just a big personality and just very fun. That it's just to cast her in this morose, kind of drab, grungy film, it just kind of maybe it just doesn't work in her favor. But again, it's not her fault at the time. Yeah.
Well, and even back as recently as 2010, I don't know that Hollywood also yet was sure how to use a female lead in a movie like this, right? So I will give them credit in that. In this final act, one of the nice changes they make from the original. So there are certain things where I'll say, this is actually an interesting improvement or interesting take on it. The notion of putting the onus on her to end this, to end the Wolfman and end the curse, that's nice. She gets the final bit at the end, But I think if this movie was made today, this same version of this movie, I think you'd see much more of an effort to kind of beef up her part throughout the movie and make her much more involved in everything that's happening. Because there are long stretches of this where she's kind of not involved. There's a sequence where he tells her to leave, and we kind of lose her for a little bit. So I think we could use more Blunt in this ultimately.
And the last one to round out our foursome is Hugo Weaving. As we live and breathe, Trev. Did we like him?
Of course. We love Hugo Weaving, right? In fact, we might like Hugo Weaving in the movies he makes more than Hugo Weaving does. I think that's maybe a safe call, right? So in this, he's playing Inspector Francis Aberline, the Scotland Yard inspector who comes to investigate this case, loosely based on Frederick Aberline, who is famously, a real-life figure, famously known for his role in the Jack the Ripper investigation. Some people might remember he was actually the character played by Johnny Depp in From Hell. Obviously a very fictionalized version of him where they made him psychic, because, I don't know, Hollywood. But the real Frederick Aberline was one of the investigators looking for Jack the Ripper. That's mentioned in this film, so I don't really understand why they changed him to Francis Aberline, but still give him the same background. I don't know, just one of those weird things.
Yeah.
But he's good in this. I mean, he kind of, again, I don't want to call it thankless. We see maybe what the purpose is of him being in this movie. I guess what I'm trying to say is you can watch this movie and for a while be like, what's the point of this character? And what's the point of having kind of a known actor as this character? And then in the final moments of the movie, you go like, that's why he's here, right? And so it all kind of comes together. But I think up to that, every moment he's on screen, he's charismatic, he's captivating, I'm with him. I like him in this. How about you?
Oh yeah, like anytime Hugo Weaving speaks, I'm drawn in. You know, his voice cadence, the way his face looks. You know what I mean? Like he's such a great character actor that I just love when he pops up in anything. He's in our Mortal Engines episode, people. So if you want to go listen to that, that's a good discussion. But I just love seeing him. I did find it a little weird though that the first time he's like talking to Lawrence, he's like really aggressive towards him. I don't know if I missed something, and like again, I watched the theatrical cut, so he was like so aggressive, and I was thinking, is Lawrence under investigation here? Like nothing's happened yet. I don't know if you felt that way. I was just very, very confused, especially because it sets up Lawrence himself as kind of a detective on his own, you know, trying to solve his brother's murder. And he was obviously not there at the time. To set this up, Lawrence is like an actor, like a stage actor, and he doesn't
stage actor,
and he does not live in England anymore. So does the investigator think that he murdered his own brother, even though he was obviously never there in the country?
Okay, so I have some thoughts about this because I agree with you. So because I think Aberline is like an effective foil for our main character in this, in that you are obviously, the movie wants you to be rooting for Lawrence throughout this entire film, right? You want him to solve what happened to his brother. Then when he becomes the Wolfman, you feel bad for him. You want him to kind of find a way out of this. But at the same time, the movie doesn't want you to hate Aberline, who is the one who's trying to figure this out and is obviously now eventually tracking down Talbot, believes Talbot is the murderer, right? It has to keep this like interesting balance where Aberline has to be the antagonist, but we can't really hate him because he's trying to do the right thing. He's trying to solve this murder. So why does he have so much antagonism towards Lawrence? And I could only think, it's not really more explained in the director's cut, but I do wonder, this made me really wonder about the role of Talbot as an actor in this, which is an invention of this film. That's not from the original, right? In the original, we don't really know what Lawrence Talbot does or what Larry Talbot does. He's just kind of, a guy who comes home after a long absence. And his relationship with his father and everything is much different in that version. And this, he's like, has this estrangement from his father. We find out a lot more about him, which we'll get to. And then there's this element of him being a famous stage actor. And that never matters, right? We're introduced to him on stage doing Shakespeare, and then that never comes back up. And I was like, what is the point of this? And the only thing I could think was, were they trying to insinuate that everybody in this village, or in particular East Aberline, like looks down on him because they see him as just this big Hollywood celebrity? Because they talk about how he actually New York. He went to New York to be an actor. Is that what they're trying to get at? Is that everyone's like, ooh, Mr. Fancy Pants actor. And that's why everyone is kind of just instantly distrustful of him. I wonder if there was like more to that initially in the script stage or something. Because other than that, it just doesn't matter he's an actor. And I was wondering, like, what could you have done with that? Like, if you're going to make him an actor, shouldn't there be scenes in this where he has to act? Wouldn't it be fun to see moments where Talbot, like, the inspectors come and maybe after he was bit, we actually see him have to kind of put on a performance or something and then have him say like, well, it's because I'm an actor, of course. Never does that. Isn't that weird? Like, I don't know. What was the point of this?
He comes around the corner with like a new costume and he's like, good day, governor.
Yeah, or like, wouldn't it like at least have a scene where something like that where he has to go undercover like in the village or something? There is a moment where he kind of like, I don't want to say cons his way into, but he kind of like barges his way into the facility where they have his brother's body so that he can see it. Mm-hmm. Why not have that be a moment where he has to like act like he's a cop or something to get in? I don't know.
He puts on a fake mustache.
I'm just saying, like, don't make him an actor for no reason. Like, it's just, again, it's like one of those things. What is the point of this? It's really weird.
I have a feeling you have more of the actor stuff in your director's cut, by the way, because mine is very, very much lip service. I don't think there's any scenes of him performing in my version.
Oh, really? Yeah. So in the director's cut, the first time we see him, it is on stage. So this is actually, because I did read that this is like a weird discrepancy. So in the director's cut, after the initial prologue where we see his brother get murdered, we cut to him giving a performance of Shakespeare, and Emily Blunt actually comes to the performance. And she comes backstage and introduces herself. And it's actually really weird because she tells him, your brother's gone missing. I've come to tell you, you've never met me, but I'm your brother's fiance. He's gone missing. I really think you should come back to Talbot Hall in England and try and help us find your brother. And he's like, no, I can't. I'm busy. This production is touring. And he's like just instantly shitty to her. So again, right away, you're like, I don't like this guy. Like, he's just not likable here. He's like really shitty. He's like, no, I can't. I can't come back. And then they hard cut from him telling her to leave and saying no to him getting on the train to go. And it's like, whoa, wait, what? Huh? It makes like no sense. And then there's a moment where he gets to the castle, talks to his father, and he says to his dad, oh yeah, Gwen sent me a letter saying that my brother is missing. And you're like, well, no, wait, that's not what happened. We saw her come and tell you. So actually there's some like discrepancies and mistakes here from, the different cuts and them not kind of matching this stuff together.
That letter is all voiceover in my version. It's all voiceover, and she's Emily Blunt is talking, and she's reading out her letter to come because her fiance, his brother's dead or something. And I didn't get any of that you just talked about.
Yeah. Okay, so a lot of the early stuff then is where it's different, because then we get the train scene, which I'll just briefly talk about because I think it's I don't know, it's interesting that this got cut, just because I think anytime you get this actor I'm about to talk about, who I'm about to talk about, I don't think you cut this guy out. You know what you're doing. Yeah. So there's just this one scene where he gets on the train to head to Talbot Hall and head back to England, and he ends up being in a cabin with the legendary Max von Sydow. And Max von Sydow is actually the character who in this version gives him the cane, the famous cane from the original 41 Wolfman that has the silver wolf's head, which of course he buys from the antique shop that Gwen Conville runs in the original film. They had to find a way to justify the cane in this movie, I guess, for some reason. I don't know. Could have just had him get it, whatever. But instead they decide, well, if we're going to try and justify the cane, let's have like a really great actor come in and do this like one scene. It's the Force Awakens idea, right? If you need someone to like make an impact in a limited amount of screen time, you can't go wrong with Max von Sydow. So Max von Sydow is this character who gives him the cane and actually explains that he got the cane in a French province where he grew up called Gévaudan. I'm probably saying that wrong, but the reason that's significant is that he tells the story about how Gévaudan is actually it's kind of famous for back in the 18th century. There was a series of murders that started to be attributed to what is called the Beast of Gévaudan. And that is a famous story still today. The movie Brotherhood of the Wolf is like very, very loosely based on that. So it's actually tying back in this idea of like some kind of wolf creature. So it's just this weird thing where it's like, he ends up in this cabin with this guy who's maybe had past experiences with like, supernatural wolf creatures. And he gives him this silver cane and even tells him, yeah, if you press this button, this little bit turns into like a knife comes out and makes a little sword. And we end up seeing him use that later. So I don't know. It's just strange that they took that out just because even though you don't need it, and even though it's brief, I can't imagine being the editor who says like, yeah, just get her Max von Sydow. We don't need him.
Yeah, I guess if they were really just going for the voiceover letter writing, I guess you kind of almost have to cut it all.
You do, and I think the other thing they said is I believe Joe Johnston has said that the cuts that were made for the theatrical cut were just a byproduct of them looking at the film and going, wow, in the cut we have, Talbot's first transformation in the Wolfman doesn't come until like over an hour into the film.
Yeah.
And I don't disagree with them. I don't mind that. I don't mind slow burns. As you know, I'm fine with kind of a slower pace, so that didn't really bother me. But I actually understand the Hollywood thinking of, the audience is coming to see a movie called The Wolfman, and they probably want to get to The Wolfman. Mm-hmm. Now, I will say, I think in that regard, I'm curious to hear about your thoughts on this, Chris. I do think they make a strategic mistake in showing us in the prologue sequence, we see very quick flashes of the Wolfman who attacks his brother. We also see the Wolfman that actually ends up biting Lawrence Talbot later during the initial rampage in the Romani camp. I really think this movie should have played it more like Jaws, right? And not had us see the Wolfman until Benicio Del Toro turns into him. What do you think? I thought it really ruins it a little bit to show us the Wolfman or show us a Wolfman already in the opening.
Yeah, like I'm fine with seeing like a claw or something like that, pieces. but they truly show the full thing right then and there. Mm-hmm. And don't get me wrong, it looks cool, like I get it. But during the big, gypsy town attack, the big ruthless killings and all that, you didn't have to show it as much as you did. It's fine if they just threw gore at the camera, and saw bodies around the village. Like that's totally fine. There's really no reason for it. And even the scene where the Wolfman jumps onto Benicio Del Toro and bites him, there's a way of shooting that. Like, again, this is Spielberg's protege. Just call up, DVS and just be like, how'd you do this?
Well, I know there's a way to film it, and I know that there was actually maybe someone on set that they could have turned to and asked about it, because I've seen a better version of that filmed in the opening scene of American Werewolf in London, when David Naughton and Griffin Dunn are attacked by the werewolf, right? And all we see there are quick flashes, right? Just very, very, like, a few frames of some kind of wolf creature attacking them. And you think you see something like, wow, I think I saw something, but man, I couldn't really make that out. And then when David Naughton becomes the werewolf later, that's really your first time seeing it, and it's just it's so much more striking. But again, we're going to hit on this a little bit. For as amazing as the Wolfman makeup is in this, and it honestly is, like, I can't say it enough. This really is one of my favorite, like, Wolfman designs. I think he looks great in this. But I also do think that Joe Johnston and some of the other people involved don't really know how to best utilize a werewolf in a movie, or how to best kind of depict it. So should we talk about Rick Baker?
Okay, real quick before we do this, because that's a perfect transition. I had two things I wanted to say about Hugo Weaving.
Okay, yeah, sure.
While the Wolfman is known for attacking the village, there's this voiceover by a priest talking, and he brings up the name Nebuchadnezzar. And as he says Nebuchadnezzar, Trev, Hugo Weaving, it's a shot of him walking down the street with that word. And for Matrix fans, Nebuchadnezzar is the ship that Neo and Morpheus and Trinity fly around in that movie, and Hugo Weaving is Smith. So, anyway, it's all connected, doesn't matter. The second thing I want to talk about is Hugo Weaving. When he's watching, do you think he was watching the German scientist in this film and taking notes about how he should play the Red Skull?
Now, we are all aware that Mr. Talbot has suffered quite traumatic personal experiences. He witnessed his mother's self-mutilations. His young mind, unable to accept it, created a fantastical truth. That his father is to blame. That his father is literally a monster.
Perhaps, because that is actually the year after this, right? So
yes, and same director. Joe Johnston goes on to direct Captain America and brings along Hugo Weaving as the Red Skull. So I absolutely think he's in that scene washing, and he's like clicking his pen, being like, "All right, more."
Yeah, because that is an appropriately hammy performance from that German doctor as well. Another one of like the good little standout side characters. So should we talk about Rick Baker, the other kind of man of the hour for this, the Academy Award-winning Rick Baker for this movie, for makeup?
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously one of the best choices they could have made in terms of, production on this, right? So I will say, I was just talking about how maybe Joe Johnston and some of the other filmmakers don't know how to best, kind of present this material. Obviously, that doesn't apply to Rick Baker. And I will say, in general, I do believe everyone making this movie had their heart in the right place. This isn't a movie where I think anybody was half-assing, and I think there was just kind of conflicting visions here to a certain degree. But everybody would agree, hey, if you're going to make a Wolfman movie, get Rick Baker. So Rick Baker actually tells an interesting story about how, he heard that there was a Wolfman movie being made, and he just kind of assumed that it was going to be all CGI. So he really didn't kind of pursue it. He even says he read like an early version of the script, and everything in the script that described the Wolfman sequences made him feel like, oh, that's going to be CGI. They're not going to do that practically. And then he talked to someone involved in the production, and the person in the production actually said, like, oh no, like, and I'm sure at this point it was Mark Romanek, but they're saying, oh no, they're thinking they want to do as much practical as possible. And Rick Baker said, like, well, I'm interested then. Like, you get me in that room. I want to talk to them. And the fact that they hadn't thought of that, the fact that they didn't go to him first is kind of shocking, because he just said he's at this point most known for American Werewolf in London. I think he'll always be most known for American Werewolf in London, which is the most incredible Wolfman werewolf transformation sequence of all time. Right? It's so brutal, so painful, right? That still holds up today. You just feel that so much.
30 years prior to this movie.
Yeah, 30 years, right? And it's still incredible. You look at that and go like, that's just not going to be topped. But beyond that, he's very open, and he always has been, about how the original Wolfman and the original Jack Pierce design is one of the monsters that got him into this interest, that made him want to be a makeup artist. So this seems like it's his destiny, right? And they come to him, and thankfully, finally they do talk to him, and he signs on. And as you said, he creates this amazing Wolfman design. but he does acknowledge at the time that he has a concern because he says he knows the transformations. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do this. Now, the interesting thing is I actually saw some interviews with him where he talked about how he actually does design a lot of practical material for the transformation scenes. And a lot of what we end up seeing in the transformation scenes utilize his designs for what it was supposed to be practically, but they just do it in CGI. And that's unfortunate, but to give credit where credit is due, Joe Johnston has explained why they went the CGI route. You have that in front of you, correct?
Yes, I do. So a reminder, everybody, Joe Johnston joined this movie 3 weeks before going into principal photography. So there was obviously limitations going in, but he is quoted, "I recognized that there were things that I was going to be able to do from the beginning to the end, and things that I would have to rely on post-production for. I decided to basically shoot Benicio in the sequence where he transforms and decide in post-production what I wanted the transformation to be. That was really my main reason for using CGI. It just gave me the flexibility." So, I don't blame him. I get it. Animatronic work, puppeteering, robotics, this takes a lot of time and effort and energy and pre-production and planning. You don't get Jurassic Park 3 weeks before going into production.
No. When you're filming a completely practical werewolf transformation, that means you need to block the sequence perfectly. You need to cut holes in the floor for the puppeteering to come through. You need to bring the puppets in. You need to bring the models and the robotics in. You need to set up the shot in a very particular way. It all has to be planned way in advance. And as you just said, his biggest thing here was time. He didn't have that time. So for him, it was easier to just tell Benicio Del Toro to sit there, make a bunch of weird faces, and then we'll go in later and figure out how to augment that with CGI. I get it. That doesn't mean I'm not disappointed, right?
Well, I think the word you used before was unfortunate, because that's exactly what I wrote down in my notes as well, is that this CGI transformation is unfortunate. It sounds like it's due to the breakneck speed in which they needed to hit the release date. And it sucks because there's really no excuse other than time to do it, because he's sitting in the chair. It's not like he's riling around on the ground like American Werewolf in London. So it's interesting that this almost would have been maybe easier, especially 30 years of technology, 30 years of technological advancements. It may have been easier to do if Trev, we had a few more months before.
Yeah, if only we had 20 more days of filming. maybe that Mark Romanek guy was onto something. To be fair, I don't know, for me, the first transformation, the one where he turns in the crypt, that actually doesn't look too bad. That's CGI, but there's something about it being in the dark. It's they film it fairly well. We see his fingers kind of growing. We see his legs extending. That one looks okay. The one in the chair, when he's tied to the chair, so there's a sequence where he gets arrested. They believe he's the murderer, but they don't understand he's a werewolf. They don't believe him yet about being a werewolf, so they think he's insane. And they tie him up in this observation room. And this is where we talk about the German doctor. The German doctor is given this, hilarious in retrospect speech about how he's well, this is just an insane man. Of course he's not going to turn into a Wolfman when the full moon comes. This is actually maybe Benicio Del Toro's best part in the movie, because this is where he actually starts going, really over the top, when he's just yelling about how he's going to murder all of them. But the problem is that's then followed by a really, really goofy looking CGI transformation. And it's just it's in really bright, harsh light. They don't cut away from it enough. Oh boy, it looks bad. And that's unfortunate and then you run into probably my favorite 5 to 6 minutes of the film, the London rampage. Mm-hmm. It just sucks that transformation sequence is so goofy looking.
It's interesting though, because looking back at the reviews for this film, it definitely felt like everybody wanted to shit on it primarily for that transformation scene. Mm-hmm. And as we're saying in this review here, that the movie's not great. It has pieces that it does very well. It just can't choose a side, Yeah. And I think it's unfortunate that 2-minute sequence overshadows a 2-hour film. And that was odd to me, or like I said, unfortunate to see that the reviewers really hammered home how bad the CGI was. And again, I'm not saying it's good.
Yeah.
But it's within context. There's kind of no way around it.
Well, not that, but it's something I've even seen like hardcore horror fans like really, really vehemently shit on this movie, and I think maybe I've even been guilty of that in the past, just based off like the memories I had of disliking. And as I said, it was kind of nice to revisit and see like, oh, actually, there's something. And like, so to your point, like I'll see people just say like, oh, that movie with the shitty CGI transformation. It's like, okay, yes, but do you remember what happens immediately after that transformation? You have the Wolfman just fucking going ham on people, running around this observation room, just tearing doctors to pieces, picks up that doctor, throws him through the window, doctor lands on the gate, he jumps down to London. That whole sequence is amazing as he's running through London. I love the bit where he like jumps down into the coach and just ends up in the coach with people and just starts slashing, and the blood is just spraying all over the coach. This is like, if you've ever just wanted to see a great freaking total, bloody, gory werewolf rampage, this movie's got you covered. I love this entire sequence. It's the highlight of the film by far for me.
Oh yeah, it's super entertaining. This is where Joe Johnston brings his blockbuster sensibilities to great effect. It's really well done. It's some of his better stuff that he did in the film. So I liked it quite a bit. I liked all the gore stuff.
Yeah, and again, I give Joe Johnston credit for, you wouldn't expect, like, there's nothing about his filmography up to this point where you think he'd be so gleeful in showing like over the top, gory, gooey murders like this, but you can just tell he's having a ball.
It made me think that, well, not think, because I think I know this, but it definitely felt like Jurassic Park 3 was edited to hell as well, because that movie, me and you are kind of, well, okay, Jurassic Park 3, I hated it when I saw it as a kid in the theaters. I was just like so disappointed, but as I get older, me and Trev actually have bonded over the goofy B-movie nature of that. It's like just a big monster movie.
Yeah,
that's
it's a
all
fun
it is.
B-movie monster movie. Yep.
Yeah, it's not great. It's not the first one. It's just a B monster mash. That's all it is.
To me, its only real big problem is that it's missing a climax, which is obviously a big problem. I wish there was about 15 more minutes there at the end with one last big action scene.
That's a big problem in Trevor's life. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, I do. And the violence in Jurassic Park 3. Is sort of visceral at points. Like, would you agree with that? Like, a velociraptor snaps a guy's fucking neck.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you that seeing this movie now, it wouldn't surprise me to know that maybe Joe Johnston was trying to push it a little bit more. And they're like, no, you can't do that with Jurassic Park, right? But you can do it with the Wolfman. And so he's like, okay, cool. Right? Maybe that was one of the perks of this to him, is saying, oh, now I can really just kind of go wild and have fun. So yeah, and he uses that to great effect here, because as you said, every like moment of violence in this movie is just it's top notch. That said, you just mentioned a moment ago that people like shit on this movie primarily for that CGI transformation. I don't disagree. I think that's the most attacked thing. But now is the time to finally talk about the other kind of elephant in the room, or the other Wolfman in the room, as it might be. Let's talk about the biggest story change they made in this version as opposed to the 41 version, because this to me is still fairly baffling. It's a very strange decision, right? And that is, so we've been tiptoeing around this, but the big reveal of this film is that the Wolfman that killed Lawrence's brother, that he's come here trying to solve this mystery, actually turns out to be his father. Turns out to be Sir John Talbot, played by Anthony Hopkins. And he's been a werewolf for a long time, right? Because this ties into, there's this whole backstory that runs through the film where the reason Lawrence is estranged from his father is he left the manor and left his father's care after his mother committed suicide. He came out and he found his mother with her throat slashed in his father's arms. His father told him, your mother unfortunately took her life. That caused Lawrence to have like a brief stay in a sanitarium because he couldn't deal with it, and then he kind of never came back home. But wait, it actually turns out that as a boy, he came out and saw his dad in Wolfman form, who had torn his mother's neck out, and he's repressed that memory. And now he's coming home, and his dad is a full Wolfman. His dad is quite evil about it. He's just like, I love being a Wolfman's great. What are you talking about? He kind of actually alludes in a very strange moment. He alludes to the idea that he murdered his brother because he started to kind of want Emily Blunt, and his brother was going to try and get her away from the manor, so that's why he killed him. So also now you're getting this like weird incestuous thing that's happening too, and it all builds to like, his dad kind of like hangs him out to dry. Says like, okay, Lawrence, you can take the fall for all of my murders. I'm gonna keep being Joe Wolfman. It's awesome. It's great. And this all builds to a climatic third act where we get Wolfman versus Wolfman.
Yeah.
This is not what I was expecting when I walked in to see this movie in 2010. I remembered it, but it was even still today, kind of revisiting. I was like, oh yeah, this. Like, what? Like, this is not necessary, right?
This is the most extreme clash of tones in the whole movie. Like, the movie, again, is a morose, drab, gothic romance horror thing, beast, whatever. At the end of this movie, it's extremely goofy. Wolfmen are flying around a Victorian house while flames about on very unnecessary wire work. There's a lot of CGI changes to their faces to make them like they're roaring a lot bigger than they are. And Anthony Hopkins is a gray wolf, of course, because he's old.
How do you like when he tears off his shirt?
Yeah, and he's kind of like jacked.
Yeah.
And it's not even like that fun silly. Like, it doesn't, like, again, I'm down for the B movie camp shit, but this one, because it's such an extreme clash, like right at the end, it's not so much fun, but yes, baffling is the word.
Yeah, it's really weird because you go back and revisit the 41 version, and the relationship between Lawrence and his dad is so loving, right? And the dad in that version, played by the great Claude Rains, he's like such this like gentle paternal figure, and he's actually the one who in the original 41, he's the character who has to end the curse by beating his son to death with the silver cane. And the movie kind of focuses in on the tragedy of that, right? This father is so glad to have his son back, and he's getting ready to leave this manor to his son and have him take over the estate, and then understand, oh my god, my son has this curse now and I have to deal with it. It's just so weird to me that anybody would look at that and say like, yes, okay, well, let's do that, but let's make the father evil. And let's make him into a Wolfman now. I've never understood that. And really the thing is, when the movie's called The Wolfman, I am wanting to see a movie about Benicio Del Toro turning into a Wolfman and the curse that entails. And the thing is, once they do the dad reveal, that immediately steals the thunder from Lawrence's curse. Right? That's not what the movie is about anymore. Mm-hmm. Yes, he is still cursed. Yes, you can still feel that. But now the movie is a revenge movie. Now the movie is building up to Wolfman versus Wolfman. And it's just like, woo, you've really lost it.
It is very much a modern blockbuster thing to do, is just get the other version of what I am and make them fight. You know what I mean? Like think of even Captain America that comes out a year later. Captain America fights evil Captain America. Okay.
Well, no, I was just about to say, I bet Kevin Feige was watching this movie and go, a villain that is just like the hero. I'm going to use that. Yeah, Ironmonger.
Yeah, and
Yellow Jacket.
Yeah, the Hulk fights another Hulk. You know, like it's just it's something to do with this time in history in the late 2000s, going to honestly now even. It's just let's double up on the characteristics of the protagonist just to have a big CGI fight.
Yeah. Black Panther versus Killmonger.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate thing about this is, again, and Chris, I'm curious to see if you agree, once you get past that fight, once you just get that out of the way, everything after that is golden. So his then pursuit of Gwen through the woods and the eventual way that wraps up, I love all that. So it's just like, if you could just take, and I know this would be tough, somebody get Topher Grace on the phone. He loves re-editing movies. See if Topher Grace can do an edit of this film that just removes all the stuff about his dad being a Wolfman too. And I actually think you might have something here. Yes, Benicio Del Toro would still be a little boring, but I think if you take out that 15 or so minutes dedicated to that, and you just concentrate on the doomed romance of these two characters and the curse of this one central character, much better film. And I don't necessarily need, don't get me wrong, I'm a simple man with simple pleasures. Do I like seeing werewolves fight? Of course I do. Who doesn't, But I don't know if it's needed in this film. I just want to get to the moment where Gwen has to make that ultimate decision and end the curse, because that's just so much better, and it's more powerful thematically.
Which ending did you get, by the way, in the director's cut?
Okay, this is interesting because I know there's slightly different versions, but I don't know if the director's cut ending is different or if that's just deleted scenes that are different.
Oh, okay.
But so spoilers for the end of this film. I got the version where he chases Gwen into the woods. We get that great shot that was the money shot in the trailer of her hiding in front of the tree and him in the background, which just looks fantastic, right? And then her making a run for it, him seeing her, he runs after her, tackles her on the cliffside. He's about to bite her and kill her, and she manages to get through to him by just saying Lawrence, it's me. And you see his eyes, and you see the humanity in his eyes. He gets distracted by a snapping twig in the distance as the police are closing in. He turns, lunges at her, and she shoots him. and ends up killing him. And then he, as is often the case in werewolf movies, he thanks her as he dies in her arms. He turns back into Lawrence and thanks her. So that was my ending. Was that pretty much what you got as well?
Yeah, that was mine.
Yeah. So I know there's an alternate version where he murders her, right? Which I have to say, I'm glad I didn't use that. Like,
Same.
I'm all for sad, tragic endings in horror movies, but you don't want to see Emily Blunt die in this. That character doesn't deserve that. Like,
No.
A Wolfman movie needs to be about the curse and the tragedy of the Wolfman, not the female love interest.
And it just gives her way more agency.
Right.
Yeah.
But we still get our sequel tease, right? Because what we didn't mention is that during the fight sequence between the two Wolfmen, good old Francis Aberline, Hugo Weaving, runs in to get involved and gets bitten by Lawrence. And the movie ends with Aberline, now bitten, holding the silver cane and looking up to the full moon and realizing he is now cursed. And so obviously he would have been our Wolfman in Wolfman 2.
Electric Boogaloo.
Electric Boogaloo. So I guess the question, Chris, is would you have been down for, if this had been more successful, right, if it had made money and wasn't a gigantic failure for them financially, would you have been down for a Wolfman 2 focused on Hugo Weaving's Aberline character now being the Wolfman? What do you think of that?
Yeah, obviously. Hugo Weaving, like we said before, is just he's just a great character actor, right? And I think being able to see him unleash in the role for the sequel, I would be so down. Just don't play it like Benicio's dull, boring ass way that he did it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my only concern would be that I don't think, if this had been a success, I also don't think that you want to leave Benicio Del Toro completely behind, right? So it's also true of the original Wolfman movies that they kept resurrecting Larry Talbot so that Lon Chaney Jr. could always come back. And I think they would have done the same thing. So I think we would have ended up in almost the same territory where we'd probably have Wolfman versus Wolfman again. But hopefully this time maybe Benicio Del Toro could kind of come up to Hugo Weaving's level and they could both kind of be, maybe overacting a little bit or just, being a little bit more energetic. But I will say, just a level of Aberline as the Wolfman, I like the idea of a Scotland Yard detective being a Wolfman. I think that adds an interesting wrinkle, and you can see the potential of what the movie could do with that. So it'd be fun for him to kind of have to go back to his job, but also now be keeping this secret.
I also like the idea of the sequel opening to that exact same moment, and then Gwen looks at him and knows that he's been bit, obviously, right? And just takes that fucking gun and just shoots him in the face, and then we just get a new Wolfman.
Or you go to the theater, you pay your money, you sit down and watch Wolfman.
This is what it is. Yeah, you pay to go see Hugo Weaving, right? Okay? And it's been hidden around, and you only ever saw the wolf. You only ever saw the wolf man, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I got it. And then it opens up, goes to the exact same time and place. Gwen notices that he's bit, fucking blows his head off, right? But then, and then it's revealed 5 minutes later when everybody disappears and they're consoling Gwen or whatever. Gwen looks down at her, bosom or something, and she's got a little nick. She's got a nick from when she killed Del Toro, and then he got her still. And then we get Wolf Woman.
Yeah,
we got that right, absolutely. And then Emily Blunt gets to fucking unleash herself. I love it.
Chris, one moment here. Call Bob Iger. Wolf Woman. I know this is universal, but I mean, I think by a couple of years, Disney will just own it all. So I think we're okay. I have a list of things here I didn't hit, which I would just like to quickly get to. But before I do that, should we briefly talk about score horror? Because, obviously the score is noteworthy for this film or newsworthy. So what did you think about it as just the general Danny Elfman score, or at least the version we hear throughout the film?
I thought it was okay.
Yeah.
I like Danny Elfman quite a bit. I know he gets flack a lot of the time for sounding exactly the same, but I think that just comes down to him working with Tim Burton so much that it's kind of just his scores are so iconic that they sound the same.
Because this one doesn't necessarily sound like a Burton score, right? This
it doesn't.
Kind of more traditionally classic. Yeah.
It does. Traditionally classic, but in the sense that indistinguishable from somebody else. I don't think I would ever have said that this was a Danny Elfman score. I would have never known that without looking it up.
That's the thing. This score is fine. It works in the moment. It's never overpowering. It sets the mood when it needs to, but I did not walk away from this going, I want to go listen to that score now.
It actually reminds me of... actually, this is a good thing. It reminds me of classic Hollywood movie scores. Like again, I watched The Wolfman, and the score... is good, but it sounds like that classic Hollywood score. You know, it's like that traditional work for hire, does its job, does it well, and that's it. And I don't know if that was so intentional by Danny Elfman just to kind of sound like one of those scores. Maybe I'm giving it way too much credit, but he is a talented guy that I wouldn't put it past him, you know?
I mean, some of those classic horror movies have great scores, but whatever. Yeah, no, I'm with you. It like, again, we mentioned how, not through any fault of her own, but how Emily Blunt's just character in this is serviceable. Same idea, right? I would call this a serviceable score.
Yes.
You know, it does what it needs to do, but it's not going to blow anyone away. I do think it's weird watching this movie and like listening to the score and thinking that they ever had that big of a problem with it, that they threw it out and tried to come up with like an electronic score instead. Like, that's strange to me, because I just feel like, no, this is the score that belongs to this film. You know?
Imagine Alan Silvestri's Van Helsing score over this one.
It'd be great, right? That is what this score is missing, is a theme. There's no kind of recognizable theme that sticks with you after this, which is unfortunate. Imagine if all the awesome rampage sequences had a killer iconic theme playing over them. That would take this to the next level. Yeah.
There's not a single motif. You're so right.
No. Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to hit on a couple quick other things, because I said I wanted to throw out some positives. We've been talking about some of the negatives, but here's some things where maybe this is heresy for some people, what I'm about to say, but there are some things in this that I think are actually maybe better than the 41 version. What is Trevor talking about? What does he mean? Okay, hold on a second. Let me just.
I've stopped recording.
Damn it! No, there's things. Okay, so for instance, one of the things I like this movie does is I like that the reaction to his healed wounds from everyone around him is more realistic in this film, right? That's really kind of glossed over and bypassed in the original film. Like, he comes in and says he's been wounded, and then he has no wounds, and everyone's like, I guess he was wrong about being wounded. I like that in this version, everyone sees the wounds, and that when they heal the next day, that freaks everyone out. And kind of everyone is like more clued in on something supernatural happening, and then being worried about him. So I actually really like that as a story element that was kind of brought in. Mm-hmm. I like that this movie does something that the 41 version doesn't do. It only does it a little bit, but I appreciate every time it leads to it, is that we see that he's actually gained heightened senses that he now has even when he's in his human form. Right? So when he hears like the cops coming from a far distance, and when he can kind of see further, because now he's picking up these wolf attributes, I thought that was a nice touch to say, oh, once you become a wolf man, you're picking up these other kind of attributes. I also like, in the sense of like set dressing and production design, I love just the look of Talbot Hall and how it's just so dusty and full of like dirt and cobwebs, and you're looking at like, who would want to live here? But man, it has that great old school horror vibe to it. And then once you do learn how the dad is kind of nuts, it kind of comes together. And like, yeah, I suppose that makes sense.
Yeah, I second everything you said just there. I also, this is going to maybe sound like heresy as well, but yeah, the first movie, 1941, I texted you this while I watched it. Kind of the underwhelming transformation. Dude just sits in a chair. It focuses on his feet. He gets hobbit feet, and then it cuts to the graveyard. I'm sure
you're being one of those guys.
No, I'm sure it was very, very scary in 1941. But you had responded back to me saying, you just sound like when kids say that Star Wars looks like shit. Well, I never really responded to that, but I do kind of have a response to you now. I would say that Star Wars still holds up, and it's proven that it does. I think that it is pretty underwhelming, even by 1941 standards.
Well, I think it is true. Like, so sometimes people go into the original Wolfman expecting to see what they've maybe seen in like clip shows or documentaries, and that is that kind of full kind of transformation on Lon Chaney's face, where he's laying in bed and he transforms. That actually is from Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. So they do the first kind of like more full scale one in that one. So they were still kind of figuring it out. The only real transition we get in the original one is actually when he dies, right? And then they do like where we see him turn back into Larry from the Wolfman.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, it is a byproduct of the time for sure. Yeah.
So there's that, and then also Emily Blunt side boob.
We do get Emily Blunt's side boob. That's true. Also surprising.
It was kind of shocking, honestly. It was kind of shocking.
If the gore was surprising, and then that was very surprising. I was like, I did not expect that. I'll tell you one thing the 41 version didn't have, Chris, and that is, and you can say whether this is a positive or negative, the 41 version also did not have weird nightmare visions of a little Gollum boy.
Yeah. Well, they did hire Elrond to be in the film, so they needed a cameo. Andy Serkis is contractually obligated to show up, which actually is played by, who plays him? Little Gollum werewolf boy is played by Asa Butterfield.
Aja Butterfield, yeah.
What did he do again?
Great. We know Aja Butterfield, of course, as the world does, from Ender's Game, a film we will talk about on here someday, and Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, another film we will talk about here on someday. So we will be back to discussing Aja Butterfield eventually. But yeah, this is a very, very early appearance for him. So I just also found out, Chris, that his full legal name is Aja Bop Far Butterfield.
Why would you ever change that?
Aja Bop Far Butterfield. 4 words. Aja, 1 word. Bop, 2nd word. Far, 3rd word. Butterfield. That's a great name.
He's like an actual live bop it.
Yeah.
Aja.
It's like Bop. Far. But so just for people to understand what we're talking about, there are like these weird kind of, and they're just put in clearly to be jump scares. But these moments where Lawrence will like kind of pass out and he has these nightmare visions, and for some reason one of them is this like little werewolf boy. I don't know. It's very strange. I didn't like it.
No,
I didn't like it. I don't need that kind of crap in my Wolfman movie. But.
Now, can we bring up the fallout of this film?
Oh, I think we have to.
Okay, so Joe Johnston has spoken out a little bit, not about the movie, but he's not naive, and he's not one to pretend or keep selling the film, knowing how troubled it was. So he has a quote here. I can't exactly remember when he said this, but it was recently after it was released, I think. I had 3 weeks of prep on Wolfman, a ridiculously inadequate amount of time to try to bring together the fractured and scattered pieces of the production. I had taken the job mostly because I had a cash flow problem. The only time in my career I've ever let finances enter into the decision process. Money is always the wrong reason for doing something that requires passionate devotion. The production was a leaky, rudderless ship in a perfect storm, suffering from bad decisions, infighting, reluctance of the powers that be to take responsibility, and to many underqualified cooks in the kitchen. I mean, at least he's honest.
Yeah, it's disappointing to hear, but also I'd say it's surprising to me to hear that it was so financially driven and that he felt like he just had no vision for it. Because again, I mean, say what you will about some of the problems of this film, but I don't think it's poorly directed. I think there's some really nice visual touches to this. I think some of the action sequences are quite exciting. This movie is actually better directed, and it's a better violent Wolfman movie than I ever would have expected from Joe Johnston. So I actually kind of give him some credit. I think he did a better job than maybe he realizes of managing to make a cohesive film in any way based on what he was given. I think he did an okay job.
I agree with you, and you know who would not agree with you is Ron Meyer, the Universal Studios president at the time. He is quoted as saying, "One of the worst movies we ever made was Wolfman. Wolfman and Babe 2 are 2 of the shittiest movies we put out."
That is insane.
Right?
First of all, Babe 2, also like a beloved film. Like a lot of people just love that movie, so it's weird to see him shitting on that. But also okay, I understand Wolfman's not the best movie, but you're going to tell me you're looking at your entire studio's output over the decades and say this is one of the worst ones?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. I think ultimately that's my takeaway from this. Revisiting this was kind of nice for me because it just helped me realize, I think my final say on this is that it's definitely not perfect. It definitely has a lot of issues, but this is one of those movies that I now realize is probably overly hated. Yes. I think this movie is fine. I think it's actually a fairly adequate, decent remake of the Wolfman, and I think it actually has a place in like the Universal Monster pantheon because there are some really good sequences in this. You know, I'll give it away. After watching this, I haven't pulled the trigger on this yet, but I saw that the Blu-ray is only like $8 right now, and I was thinking about it because I was like, this is maybe worth $8 because there's certainly sequences I'll revisit. So I don't know. I think it's okay. That's where I felt. That's not the most passionate defense, but it's what the movie deserves.
Yeah, and actually this discussion has brought it up a little bit more for me, to be totally honest. Like in the beginning, I came out a little hot against it. But as discussing it, as sometimes happens on this show, one of us, breathes life into the other. And I think it's an adequate, I don't know if I want to say competently made movie, but it's like I'm kind of in awe that they even made a movie from this disaster of a production. So
this is like a better ending for this kind of movie than you often get with these kind of troubled productions.
Yeah,
that's
everybody,
for sure.
Go listen to our Fantastic Four review. This is fucking Citizen Kane compared to that. So,
and I think for me, what's also helping me is as like a horror fan, in particular as a fan of like werewolves, I also just mentioned earlier there's not a lot of great werewolf movies. So, you know, if this was like a Dracula movie, I might be like, you know what, there's a lot of great Dracula movies I could watch instead of this. But honestly, there ain't that many awesome werewolf movies. So you take what you can get, right? And you find yourself kind of talking yourself into being like, okay, this one's better than a lot of other options I have. So I don't know. Maybe that helps me like it a little bit more, because this is probably one of the. It's weird to say, this is probably one of the 10 best werewolf movies. So it has that going for it, I suppose.
That should be on the DVD. One of the 10 best werewolf movies you'll ever see.
I honestly just think if we had a more quirky, engaged performance from Benicio Del Toro, and if we kind of dropped out a little bit of the father as Wolfman storyline, we would actually have a winner here, I think.
Isn't that upsetting that the guy that was maybe shepherding this thing through the past 4 years of production, that wanted to be heavily involved creatively and personally and loved the Wolfman character while he was growing up and, you know, collected memorabilia, is kind of the weakest part of the movie?
No, that's what I said. That will forever be baffling to me. That guy, this guy who collects the merchandise, loves the movie, that he looked at that Lon Chaney Jr. performance that's full of so much humanity and warmth and humor, and he said, I don't want to do any of that. I only want to do the sad sack stuff.
Maybe it's not in the best interest of the property to get fans to make the movie.
This is true. It's true. Yeah. That has backfired in many, many cases. Yep.
Yeah. I guess one other thing we want to mention is where this leads. So, yes, there was firings, people, especially, this is funny, Universal Pictures chairman Mark Schmooger. So what a great name. He was fired in October before this movie came out, by the way. October 2009, he was fired because the budget for this movie was being too inflated, and because Duplicity, Land of the Lost, Funny People were all flops, and then the budget for Robin Hood, the Russell Crowe vehicle, the movie we may be discussing in the future, that was getting out of control.
Yeah.
But that didn't stop Universal. They will not let these characters die, which, don't get me wrong, I don't think they should, but another swing and a miss. Here in 2012, they planned a spin-off movie that eventually became Werewolf: The Beast Among Us. What is that?
So I've never seen it. I'm aware of it, and so that was actually, it was released direct to video. That was a straight to DVD film that Universal pumped out, and I just kind of avoided it like the plague because I was like, I just had no faith in it. But I remember hearing at the time and doing research confirmed to me that yes, that was initially meant to be like a spin-off to this film, and then it ends up becoming just a completely unrelated werewolf movie that they made. Right. So it's really weird because it's like this like kind of just random Universal werewolf movie that exists, and today it's basically a movie that actually doesn't exist because people have just forgotten about it completely. Yeah.
So then November of 2014, Universal hires Aaron Guzikowski to write the shared universes reboot of The Wolfman. And in 2016, they reach out to Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I had completely forgot about this, that Dwayne Johnson was almost going to be the Wolfman.
There's a reason you forgot that, Chris. It's because your brain did the right thing, and it protected you by allowing you to not even consider a world where Dwayne Johnson plays the Wolfman, because that sounds like shit.
Yes, that sounds horrendous.
You and I can exactly picture what a Dwayne Johnson Wolfman movie would be, right? Yeah. And it ain't good. It's like a total like just action fest, and ugh.
Yeah, no bueno for me and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I used to love that guy, I really did. But the last 10 years of him making 2 movies a year that all look the same, he's got to take 3 years off. He's got a lot of money. Just take 3 years off, bro.
Take 3 years off, and also be willing to take some creative risks at some point. At this point, what do you have to lose? You know?
Yes.
I think he's a guy that, not to go on a rock tangent, but I think he's a guy that he got spooked when early on he did Southland Tales, and he gave like a very kind of bizarre, quirky, actorly performance in that, and nobody liked that movie. And I think he said, okay, I'm never doing that again. And that's unfortunate because I don't like that movie, but he's awesome in it. And I wish he had taken the lesson of saying, I should do more stuff like that. I should seek out interesting filmmakers and try to do things like that and mix it into my bigger budgets. But now he's just like, no, I'm only going to do movies that are guaranteed hits. And that's always sad.
Yeah. It was like Pain and Gain. where I think is one of Michael Bay's weirdest, silliest movies in a long time, that he takes away from the Transformers universe for a while. And it's like, you know, Michael Bay off the chain in a good way. And then Dwayne Johnson comes in, and he's really goofy, and he makes fun of himself. He's self-deprecating, and that's something that The Rock just is incapable of moving forward. Anyways, not The Rock cast, but where were we? This led to May 2020, actually, recently as last year, after the success of The Invisible Man? I almost said The Invisible Woman.
Because we should say, like, that Aaron Guzikowski one with Dwayne Johnson, sounds like that would have been the Wolfman that fits into the Dark Universe.
Yes.
And as we will soon talk about, the whole Dark Universe thing blows up in their face. So now we move into this, like, the modern era where they've kind of just said, well, okay, we still want to get all these Universal monsters going, but we're just taking this new approach of letting filmmakers kind of helm their own personal, little smaller visions about it. So yes, now in the wake of Invisible Man, which is kind of a surprise, massive success, both critically and financially, they turned to the director of that film, Lee Wanell, who I think you and I both love. I mean, Upgrade was awesome. Invisible Man was awesome. Obviously, one of the co-creators of Saw. And they say, well, you did it for the Invisible Man. Can you do it for the Wolfman? So he is now signed on to helm the new version of the Wolfman with, I alluded to this earlier, also a leading man I quite enjoy, Ryan Gosling. Who we also know is also a huge horror fan, and I'm sure is very excited about this. And all I can say about this, the only thing I've heard, I don't know if you've seen this, Chris, but the one little like tidbit I've heard about this, and I can't remember if this came from Winnell, maybe he said this, but what I've read is that they won't say too much about the story, but they say it's kind of like if Nightcrawler with Jake Gyllenhaal was like a Wolfman movie. Like that's the kind of the vibe they're going for, and that sounds cool to me. So hopefully that turns out well.
Have they confirmed? They've obviously confirmed that it's going to be like a modern take.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it'll be modern. I think all these kind of like ones they're going for now are kind of meant to be more modern.
Nice,
so,
nice,
yeah,
cool. That is exciting. I do love me some Ryan Gosling, fellow Canadian, Canada.
And I don't know if you ever noticed this, Chris. It's kind of hard to notice, but he's kind of a handsome man.
He's okay.
Yeah, all right.
Solid 7. I mean, that's about it for the Wolfman here. So following in our Halloween season extraordinaire, The Curse of the Dark Universe, next episode is all about Dracula Untold. I have never seen this movie. So
this is another one I've seen once, and Chris, I don't remember a GD thing about that movie. I think Dracula's in it. Okay, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's the case.
Your favorite actor's in it too, Luke Evans.
Yeah, that's probably why I've forgotten a lot about it, so we'll see. But hey, look, I kind of slightly came around on this one, so maybe Dracula Untold will become my favorite Dracula movie. You never know. That's the joy of this podcast.
Yeah. Joy, quotation marks. Wait.
We're not completely miserable having to do this every 2 weeks. No, it's fine.
No, we kid. We love you for taking the time out of your day listening to us.
We love watching these movies. We love talking about them. We just don't like having to talk to each other. That's the real problem.
Yeah. I have a dartboard with Trev's face on it. Every single
because I'm the one who convinced you to do this show.
Anyway, Curse of the Dark Universe continues next episode with Dracula Untold, and will culminate with 2017's The Mummy. So please stick with us. Best way to do so is at F2FPod. That's at F2, the number 2FPod on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, everywhere. Check your podcast app. There's our Letterboxd links as well. Like us there, like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. Join the tribe and hit that subscribe. Keep along this curse.
Let me just say, awoo!
Thanks for listening.
No? All right.
No, I'm cutting you off.
All right.
We're not gonna vamp. That's not till next week.
We're both fired.
We're fired. See ya.